Hey, how's it going, folks? It's Juno here. We learn. We observe things, we see their outcomes, and then we replicate and mimic them for our own ends. But when do we stop to consider that that process of observation and repetition can actually end up being less positive overall than we might initially perceive? It's easy to see when something that somebody does gives them some defined benefit. And then when we incorporate that into ourselves, we then attempt to mimic not only the action, but the result as well. There will be many times in life when that's simply not possible. It's a convergence of environmental factors and that unique individual situation that allows them to process a certain behavior and come out with a specific outcome. Nevertheless, in observing the behaviors, we gain some insight into what we can adapt ourselves into doing and hopefully achieving similar outcomes. The harder part, obviously, is identifying the situation in which certain behaviors are applicable. While I take this all as a given, what I think is misread or not even considered is the long-term effects of mimicking certain behaviors. Manipulation is one particular behavior that you can appreciate has some very positive immediate outcomes when performed successfully. The ability to deceive somebody to your own advantage appears to be a behavior that would be highly beneficial for the individual. However, in the medium term, the reputational damage that it incurs actually ends up having a net negative effect. But in what ways are we able to see other behaviors that have longer term potential costs that are hard to perceive? And how do we prevent becoming trapped in a repetitive cycle of individuals perceiving net negative behaviors that initially appear to be positive? I suspect that this is a cyclical process in civilization as a whole, where in certain such situations you are only given a certain amount of choices, so a really bad choice is hard to come by because it's not yet possible. But once you get to a certain state in civilization, you're so alienated from the effects of your actions, they're so distributed that on an individual basis you neither feel nor assign personal responsibility to them. I think this may be the phase of civilization that we're currently in. If you consider two political opponents running for office, an office of responsibility and authority, picture, if you will, that one tries to state clearly and honestly his aims, his ambitions, what he believes he can do, and what the cost will be. Let us say that it is during a time of war, and to win a war, this representative says it will cost many lives, and it'll be suffering, and it'll take time, and there won't be immediate benefit. However, in the end, you will prevail, or you will be given the best chance to prevail and survive. And a similar individual runs opposing him, but says that with their technique or strategy, and under their leadership, an immediate victory is possible, one without suffering and death, one which speaks to how we wish the world to be, and maybe not the realities of how the world is, and may even proclaim that the notion of declaring that the world must be one way is fallacious, and It is a method for mind control to insist that the world can only be one way. It's a way of preventing people of thinking about the world differently, or accepting that it could be another way. And in this, it appeals to the wishful thinking of the populace. And ultimately, you can see that one has a greater chance of becoming elected through such rhetoric. And to even assign it as dishonesty may be unfair, because a person may be so deluded as to believe that what they have said is actually the case. However, they would only be able to persist in their activity if society is as deluded as they are. And it is key to identify the process of wishful thinking in that delusion, the wanting to believe the positive things that are being said are true, and therefore defending it to try and make it true. You will often see those who do proclaim certain things that are very uncomfortable are met with ad hominem attacks. Not because necessarily they deserve them, but out of the psychological necessity that the source of such negative thoughts, of such uncomfortable feelings, or the inspiration for uncomfortable feelings, must be suppressed. And if you can suppress the source of it, then you don't have to deal with the effects of it, even if it is just an alarm, an automaton, a mechanism to alert you. And if you consider it in this fashion, would it not be odd, should you live in a house and the fire alarm began to ring, that you were more concerned with silencing the fire alarm than with dousing the fire? And I understand that many things compete for our attention, and screaming fire, like the boy who shouted wolf, is one method that many people can use to maintain your attention on them and raise their profile and significance, and ultimately their influence and power. And that has to be judged and dealt with separately. But to ensure that a psychological block is not placed on individuals that merely do not want to comprehend the potentially negative, though very real, situation of a fire, would ultimately only lead to the loss of their property and lives. And that has to be countered in some way, consciously. Again, I don't begrudge individuals who feel that reaction. I find it natural, very instinctual and psychological. But some are more afflicted by that than others. And if that is what guides their relative personal influence, then that can be of true concern at a larger level. If you can find enough accumulation of that sentiment, you can direct the entire society into a decline. A decline that some will profit personally from. And that is the great threat. When I consider the human cost of progress, I don't dwell a great deal on the loss of life. That seems to be a fact of existence that no amount of feeling can amend. Nevertheless, there seems to be some requirement from society that we display feeling about this subject in order to communicate something about ourselves. When this is a highly inefficient system and unnecessary, and only done for the benefit of others, and not even the long-term benefit, the short-term emotional benefit, at a long-term cost, a long-term material cost. Whenever I consider, however, the developmental loss, the loss in mental processing power and personal ability that things like conflict generate, that could have been harnessed and utilized for real social benefit, for real societal development, evolution, that I find upsetting and disturbing, because that has real physical change. There is an opportunity cost that's truly associated with that. We will all die. Mourning death is a rite, and the ceremony allows us to feel a sense of control, but that control is somewhat an illusion. The greatest theft a man can truly have is that of the choice of his demise. When someone is struck down with a terminal illness in their youth or middle age, I don't feel greatly saddened by their passing, but I feel that a great violation has taken place in that they were not able to decide their end, especially from a masculine perspective. I give every man the right to go and die on whatever hill he wants, and he should be entitled to that small piece of control, to choose the means of his own death. But when nature takes that choice from him, to me that feels like a gross injustice. And I accept that it is part of the natural world, should we live in nature, that sometimes our deaths are unavoidable. Should we die of environmental factors like starvation, drought, predation. But some of those still maintain a personal level of control, where you're able to dictate in the moment that you are hunted. The decisions you make and the positions you are able to put yourselves into can define your survival and success potentially. But in the case of simply random mutation, some sort of mathematical remainder, and that causing an eventual, unavoidable death, I feel saddened by that. And to look to society and to realize that the scope and context within which we operate is often beyond our comprehension, and it's somewhat even futile to attempt to understand it, because the frame of reference goes so beyond what we can reasonably manage with our life experience. That is the great challenge. And that is the level of futility we should live consciously with. We should understand, have some knowledge of it. The greatest self-swindling is the compulsion to distraction on anything that illuminates our limitation and our vulnerability. Though psychologically there is a load that is tolerable, if you make no effort to exercise that load, then any pressure will become a depression. recently discussed with a friend of mine the concept of living a neat life and not in employment or educational training. And it seems to be, among some communities, a kind of glorified existence, because it appears to be free of concern and one of high comfort. But in our discussion, I began to take the position that it is in comfort that we lose our ability to develop. And one of the greatest components in comfort is ignorance. When you confide in yourself that you need know no more, you have all the information you need. You know what you need to know. And only those things, and inside that box you feel strong. But to maintain that position is to refute adaptation and evolution as concepts, despite their obvious existence in reality. And no doubt, someone can profit off this position that you'd like to maintain, and they can sell to you further reasons with which to comfort yourself in your belief. I can do it. I can conjure rationalizations for you that will make you feel like you're correct, even if I know you're wrong. And I know that you're so desperate for that I can use that dependency to exploit and extort you. But what if, instead, I show you the things that you don't want to see, but might actually make it so that you're not dependent anymore? That you lose your dependency on your ignorance. If I can show you that while absolute and constant pressure is destructive, controlled and defined pressure that you choose to apply to yourself is an enormous creative force that will lead to your evolution. And in having consciousness, what we truly have above every other being on this earth is the ability to recognize our programming and begin to overwrite it. We might not always be able to do it, but we can make a start. Consciousness is the ability to recognize that you have programming and to begin the process of overwriting it. And in that way you can control your evolution, and you're not leaving it to chance. You're not leaving it to natural selection. It becomes personal selection, and you're selecting to survive. And survival isn't found in making yourself comfortable. That would be termed palliative care. Survival is based on your adaptation and your eventual evolution through finding and exposing yourself to developmental pressures in a controlled manner in which you do not become overcome, but you optimize to find exactly the right point of pressure you can maintain to give you the most efficient benefit.